The intense, intimate, and strategically controlled ambient lighting in the ledger, a bar so dedicated to its own exclusivity it required a password just to reserve a table, was designed to mimic the soft, expensive glow of a highly secure bank vault. Everything about the space, the leather, the dark wood, the hushed, reverent conversation, felt engineered to exclude the real world. I hated it instantly, knowing it was the antithesis of the honest grit and structural necessity that defined my work. I was only here because my sister, Priya, had insisted, desperate to introduce me to someone who wasn't a suit or a survivalist. Her exact words, "He's a humble building contractor, Veda, works with his hands, just the palate cleanser you need after those finance sharks." My palate needed an entire industrial scrubbing, but I had shown up. I was watching the entrance when he walked in, and the instant I saw him, the cynical knot in my stomach tightened. I knew immediately, in the cold, sinking way an architect knows they've just hit bedrock under what should have been easy soil, that Priya was completely wrong. He introduced himself as Elias. He was tall, but his height wasn't the lumbering presence of manual labor. It was the lean, controlled posture of someone who pays a great deal for excellent alignment. He wore a deceptively simple outfit of a dark gray merino sweater and jeans, yet the way the wool fell on his shoulders was a statement of tailoring and expense I understood better than any flashy suit. Most damningly, he rested his hands on the table with an unnatural stillness. They weren't calloused, scraped, or faintly lined with grime. They were the hands of a man whose heaviest exertion involves signing documents or holding a cold glass. They were untouched. "Traffic was unavoidable," Elias murmured, his eyes striking unsettling shade of dark jade, making a fleeting, clinical assessment of the room before locking on to me. His voice was low, educated, and contained. He didn't sound apologetic, he sounded like he was announcing a corporate fact. My initial flash of intuition wasn't that he was a billionaire, it was something more immediate and frankly more insulting. He was a narcissist practicing poverty tourism, a rich man bored with his comfort, pretending to be down to earth to feel better about his privilege. He was slumming it for a night, searching for an authentic woman. I decided then and there I wasn't going to let him have his fantasy easily. "Of course," I replied, my voice dry. "I didn't offer a handshake. Always unavoidable when you're busy, Elias. So, the contractor life. I hear it's brutal out in Bushwick this season." I watched him blink. This was a low-level psychological hook. If he were a real contractor, he'd know Bushwick was facing a permitting freeze and was quiet this season. He paused, a beat too long for a man living the reality, before answering. "It can be," he conceded, the corner of his jaw twitching almost imperceptibly. "But the real work, it's less about the noise and more about the silent failures, the foundations that buckle years later because someone skimped on the initial support." It was a beautiful, melancholy metaphor. It was also utterly divorced from the reality of coordinating subcontractors. He wasn't talking about construction. He was talking about the immense, frightening weight of his own life. And just like that, the cynical hook sank deeper. I wasn't going to call him out. I was going to use the lie. My low-income housing project, the Phoenix Block, was dying for lack of a major backer. This man, whatever his real job was, moved in those circles. He was a door, and I intended to open him with the right leverage. We moved from the bar to a quieter booth, the soft lighting doing nothing to soften the hard edges of my growing certainty about Elias. As we settled, I could feel him analyzing me. His eyes moved over my simple, thrifted dress, the practical architecture of my messenger bag, and my short, functional haircut. He was meticulously checking off the boxes for his current fantasy. Unmaterialistic, real, grounded. "So, Veda," he asked, the contained curiosity flickering in his jade eyes. I imagine it's more aesthetic than commercial. I seized the opening, letting the full weight of my professional cynicism hit him. I specialize in sustainable, low-income, vertical development. I build durable, affordable housing on razor-thin margins. I spend my days dealing with hostile zoning boards, structural engineers who want triple the budget, and investors who see people as numbers on a spreadsheet. I hit the last phrase with deliberate coldness, waiting for him to recoil. A genuine contractor would have winced and shared pain. An actual rich man might have shown disgust. Elias did neither. Instead, his intense expression softened into an unsettling mask of sincere interest, as if I had just presented him with an intellectually stimulating puzzle. The margin work is the most challenging, he agreed readily. It's not enough to be sustainable, you have to be scalable. You must find creative ways to manage long-term capital outflow against projected socioeconomic returns. Otherwise, the foundation fails. I froze. Scalable? Capital outflow? Socioeconomic returns? My internal warning bells went from a chime to a siren. He had just used the precise, ruthless vocabulary of high-level corporate finance, a language understood only in corner offices where decisions affect thousands of livelihoods. He realized his slip immediately. A genuine flicker of panic, the purest honesty I'd seen all night, crossed his features, the horror of an actor forgetting he wasn't supposed to speak Shakespeare. Pulling his hands into his lap as if to hide the untouched evidence. You know, from the contractor perspective, he stammered, frantically trying to find the thread of his lie. You have to find cheap materials, and he trailed off, the explanation dying a pathetic corporate death. My conviction was absolute now. He was an investor playing dress-up. Not just any investor, but one with the staggering strategic vocabulary of a CEO. He thought he was fooling me, but he was merely confirming the stunning size of the fish I'd just hooked. He was a soft mark, a privileged idiot searching for validation, offering his own brilliance up for ridicule. Right, I said, allowing a slow, calculated smile, the kind reserved for negotiating a bad contract, to spread across my face. Capital forecasting. Very important for the humble building contractor. I decided then I would give him his fantasy. I would let him play his game, and when the time was ripe, I would casually drop the name of the Phoenix block and ask his high-level corporate strategist contacts for a meeting. The lure of his own power would save my project. The hook was set, and I was committed to my own equally dangerous deception. I agreed to a second meeting, but the location was non-negotiable. It wasn't the Ledger this time. It was a bustling, no-frills coffee shop near my studio, a place where the air was thick with the scent of stale espresso and the genuine, palpable anxiety of looming deadlines. It was the antithesis of his world. Here, money was something you chased, not something you wore. Elias arrived early again, already nursing a black coffee. He had swapped the statement merino for a simple, slightly faded cotton hoodie, an attempt at anonymity that only highlighted his dramatic commitment to the charade. He took your advice, he said as I slid into the booth opposite him, offering a strained, polite smile. I spent yesterday reviewing some of the older Bushwick codes, found some interesting material on commercial drainage requirements. I didn't return the smile. He was still giving me the humble contractor routine, which meant he was still under the delusion that I was buying it. This was the moment to apply strategic, professional pressure. I had to see how far his corporate genius stretched when he couldn't use his wealth as a shield. Drainage is amateur hour, Elias, I stated, pulling out my tablet. I navigated to the blueprint for my community project, the Phoenix block, and pushed the screen toward him. The Phoenix block sits on a brownfield site. We're facing a mandated $4 million environmental cleanup fee and a hostile zoning board that keeps pulling a subjective satisfaction clause to delay our permits. My initial foundation funding is tied up. Now, a real contractor, one who works on this scale, would know that simply securing a new bank loan is inefficient. They would know how to navigate the complex layering of tax abatement programs and federally backed green bond issues to offset that cleanup cost. The question isn't how to dig, it's how to leverage the hole. How would you solve that problem? I didn't move. My gaze was a physical weight, fixed on him, searching for the tell, the moment the humble contractor facade would shatter under the weight of actual, high-level financial complexity. He didn't disappoint. The transition was immediate and chilling. The gentle, slightly anxious man in the hoodie vanished entirely. Elias leaned forward, his focus laser-sharp, and his eyes, those deep jade pools, turned cold, calculating, and absolutely predatory. This was the authentic man, the financial weapon. The subjective satisfaction clause is meaningless if the process is rigorously documented, he murmured, his voice dropping to the quiet, authoritative pitch of someone used to giving orders that moved markets. You don't waste time fighting the zoning board on the fee. You fight them on the process. You immediately apply pressure via a preemptive injunction, a strategic threat of a civil rights violation for impeding affordable housing development. That scares the city council more than any lawsuit. It's a delaying tactic used to force compliance. He didn't pause for breath. As for the cleanup, he continued, tapping the screen exactly where the complex environmental survey data was located, you don't offset, you integrate. You use the mandated cleanup cost as a capital asset. The EPA grants significant tax credits for remediated sites. You structure the funding as a long-term capital influx, bringing in a highly specialized anchor investor who takes the tax break. This effectively means they pay for the cleanup, not you. It's a classic cost-saving through long-term capital forecasting maneuver. Brutal, but efficient. He stopped, rigid. The silence was deafening. He had just dictated a masterclass in high-stakes corporate strategy that solved a problem I'd been paralyzed by for 6 months. The words hung in the air, glittering with cold, hard genius. Then the crash. He realized what he'd done. He pulled back, as if scorched, the color draining from his face, desperately trying to reassemble his persona. Or, you just, get cheaper materials and lots of them, plumbing pipe discounts. Very important for contractors. I stared at him, a dizzying mix of admiration and contempt warring inside me. He was a breathtakingly pathetic liar and a financial savant. But the primary psychological hook was now cemented. I had access to a mind that could genuinely save my project. And he was offering his expertise freely, convinced he was merely demonstrating contractor knowledge. I had to save the man from himself before I could use the strategies.
The dynamic between us completely inverted. Elias showed up unannounced at my chaotic architecture studio, claiming he needed my professional counsel on shelf-hanging mechanics. His presence wasn't an attempt to smooth over the financial slip from the coffee shop. It was a desperate, almost pathetic plea for structured failure. He didn't come to continue the lie in a meaningful way. He came to be exposed as fundamentally incompetent in the physical world. The task was simple to the point of comedy. Affix a basic wooden shelf to the drywalled storage closet. Elias approached the power drill, a $20 consumer model with the intense, unsettling concentration of a surgeon attempting to disarm a bomb. He measured meticulously, checked the spirit level 3 times, and consulted the manufacturer's manual, which he had obviously printed from a high-end laser, before daring to touch the wall. He was overanalyzing the process to death, paralyzed by the fear of error. Predictably, he failed spectacularly. He drilled the first anchor 3 inches too high. The second anchor wasn't just crooked, he applied the torque incorrectly, ripping a jagged, star-shaped hole in the plaster as the drill bit jammed. He didn't curse or throw the tool, he simply backed away, looking at the pulverized drywall with the clinical defeat of a scientist whose multi-million-dollar experiment has yielded garbage. "It appears," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, "the shear load calculation was fundamentally incorrect. I underestimated the tensile strength of the substrate. This is a complete, irrefutable failure." I leaned against the doorframe, watching the man who could move billions across continents struggle with a basic household appliance. He was sweating, not from physical exertion, but from the sheer, profound humiliation of incompetence. This was the true psychological rehook. When he was solving my financial nightmares in 2A, he was cold, powerful, and terrifying. When he was failing at manual labor, he was profoundly, helplessly human. I finished hanging the shelf in 2 minutes. The silence in the studio felt heavier than any construction material. I realized his fear wasn't about being loved for his money. It was the opposite. He was afraid of the unpredictable, unquantifiable chaos of a simple life. His wealth meant that every casual choice carried monumental consequence. His lie was a clumsy, desperate attempt to find a place where he didn't have to be a savior or a destroyer, just a man who was allowed to fail
cold
without
cynicism
the headline.
began to melt away, replaced by an aching pity. I was faced with a brilliant, unhappy man, and my own initial goal of leveraging him suddenly felt reprehensible. Our relationship wasn't built on his lie alone, but on my own deceitful complicity. The unspoken agreement to let him perform his charade. I decided my game had a new, much more dangerous rule. I would continue to accept his lie, but only until I figured out how to make the real, terrified man feel safe. And in return, he would continue to unknowingly offer the expertise that could save the Phoenix block. The allure of the lie was its terrible, comforting balance. The following weekend, the lie took us to the derelict community center that was slated to become the Phoenix block. I had finally secured the space for a few weeks of preliminary, non-structural work, mostly clearing decades of debris, rotting plaster, and assessing internal damage. I brought Elias along, not out of necessity, but to satisfy his peculiar, urgent need to fail at manual labor. The air inside the abandoned shell was heavy with dust, the metallic tang of rust, and the damp, sour scent of slow decay. It felt like the authentic opposite of the ledger, and Elias seemed oddly grounded by the grime. He wore brand new stiff overalls and a tool belt so pristine it looked like a museum exhibit. I handed him a shovel. His grip was tentative, accustomed only to the fine weight of a Mont Blanc pen or the cold geometry of a phone. The goal here, I instructed, tying a bandana over my hair, is simple. Clear this corner down to the concrete slab. We need to assess the drain tile integrity before the engineers arrive. Elias nodded, his face serious, treating the task like a complex financial model. He started digging, but his movements were all wrong. Hesitant, calculated, lacking the rhythmic, mindless power the task demanded. He was treating the mound of dirt like a financial ledger, searching for an elegant, non-messy solution where only brute force was required. He barely lifted the shovel, scraping rather than digging. After 20 minutes, he wasn't sweating from exertion, but his eyes were strained with concentration. He was trying to calculate the most efficient way to move the dirt, a problem his corporate brain was ill-equipped to handle. The lie here was not about convincing me, it was about convincing himself that he could seamlessly exist in a world where his immense mental power was utterly worthless. The vector of force distribution on this tool is highly inefficient.
he murmured, leaning heavily on the shovel, exhausted by his own overthinking. "It's a shovel, Elias. It's supposed to be inefficient. It's supposed to be hard and tiring. That's the point of this kind of labor." I realized then why this was his sanctuary. Here, his corporate mind and his vast wealth were irrelevant. Here, he was equal to the dirt he was moving, and spectacularly, demonstrably bad at it. For a man whose entire life was predicated on effortless, perfect execution, this profound, public failure was liberating. He kept going, his stiff and awkward movements, while I found a strange, compelling comfort in watching a giant purposefully shrink himself. I was experiencing the unsettling intimacy of watching a giant purposefully shrink himself.
The late autumn light struggling to penetrate the dust-caked windows of the center. We were sitting on 2 overturned, grimy buckets, sharing a bottle of tepid water. Elias had a streak of dried dirt smeared across his forehead, and his shoulders were slumped with a genuine, weary exhaustion I had never seen on him before. He looked calmer, though. The twitch in his jaw, usually present even during dinner, was gone. "Do you ever wonder about the point of it all, Beta?" he asked, staring at the exposed, broken concrete slab beneath his feet. He wasn't looking at me, but at the desolate space itself. The relentless pursuit of more. More money, more market share, more control. My father used to say, "If you're not expanding, you're dying." But sometimes I look at the end result of all that expansion, and it just looks like a massive empty slab. He wasn't talking about construction or real estate anymore. He was talking about the Thorn Empire, the terrifying, expanding legacy that I knew, intellectually, commanded billions, but which he clearly felt commanded him. "That's why I build where I build," I confessed, my guard dropping in response to his honesty. "It's not about expansion. It's about repair. You tear down the decay, clean out the rot, and build a single home that stays warm and safe for 50 years. That's my scale of success." He turned his head slowly, looking at me with an expression that twisted my heart. It wasn't lust or casual interest. It was desperate recognition. "You have a foundation that won't buckle," he whispered. The sincerity was crippling. I had come to this site ready to execute the next phase of my plan, subtly dropping hints about needing a major backer for the Phoenix block. But how could I execute a manipulation on a man who was pouring out his soul, revealing a raw, aching unhappiness beneath the corporate steel? My initial, cold, cynical goal, using his lie for my gain, suddenly felt utterly unforgivable. A wave of profound, acidic guilt washed over me. I wasn't the authentic woman he thought he was seeking. I was a user, a strategic manipulator, just as cynical as the greedy investors he feared. Our relationship wasn't built on his lie alone, but on my own deceitful complicity, a deeper, more corrosive deception, because I knew the truth and chose to exploit it. I decided right then I would not bring up the Phoenix block funding. Not yet. I would just be Veda, the only person who let Elias Thorn be terrible at using a shovel and allowed him to express the fear of the empire he was supposed to command. I would postpone the inevitable collapse until the man, not the strategist, was ready to face it. The shared exhaustion from the community center project had stripped away the last layer of our public formality. Elias was no longer attempting clumsy contractor slang. He was simply existing, and our connection now thrived not over anything truthful, but in the protective shell of his false identity. It was at his studio apartment, his supposed contractor's flat, that this deceptive intimacy reached its peak. It was a bleak, small space, beige walls, minimal functional furniture, and a persistent damp odor from a window that never quite sealed. He kept it almost pathologically tidy, but it held none of the luxurious warmth that a man of his real stature would inherently crave. It was a space designed for temporary occupancy, not life. One rainy evening, while we were huddled on his worn leather sofa, sharing cheap takeout and the muffled sounds of the city's honest noise, I noticed the architectural prints he had pinned to the wall with small brass tacks. They weren't construction plans. They were stark, modernist sketches of massive, empty, geometric buildings. They looked like structures designed to repel humans, tracing the severe, uncompromising lines of a sketch of a massive, windowless tower. Elias shrugged, pulling his knees up to his chest, shrinking his body into the corner of the couch. I did, years ago, before the job took over everything. They're unsettling, I said honestly. Beautifully executed, but they look like places where people go to be alone. Like tombs for ambition. He nodded, his jade eyes distant, staring at his own creation. That's accurate. My childhood home was like that. A glass and marble vault. Everything was vast, cold, and flawless. You didn't dare lean on a wall or put a glass down without a coaster. It was a museum designed for display, not a home for living. It clicked then. His small, ugly, tidy studio wasn't just his cover. It was his genuine escape pod. It was the only space where he felt he could control the expectations and, more importantly, the scale. He needed to be small to feel safe. With the quiet permission of his confession, I spent the next hour working on the space with the instinctive urge of an architect to fix a broken structure. I didn't spend money. I simply rearranged the furniture, angling the lamp to cut the perpetual shadow, and brought in a forgotten, vividly patterned tapestry from the Phoenix Block project to hang over the worst wall stain. I created a small, visible sanctuary in the sterile box he called his refuge. Elias watched me in complete silence. When I was finished, the room was still small and cheap, but it felt alive, personalized, and most crucially, forgiven of its flaws. He finally looked at me, a profound, aching gratitude shining in his eyes. "You're the only person," he said, his voice barely a breath, "who has ever made a space feel safe just by being in it. You don't know how terrifying it is to live in a place where your every movement is watched, where the scale of your life is so big that you disappear inside it." The realization was potent. The lie wasn't about avoiding gold diggers. It was about reducing the terrifying scale of his existence. And I, the woman playing along with the charade, was his anchor. The real danger wasn't that he would find out I was planning to use him. The danger was that I was genuinely falling in love with the lonely man who was so terrified of his own shadow that he had to pretend to be someone else to finally feel seen. The calm inside Elias's small, functional studio, our self-made haven of authenticity, shattered violently 2 days after I rearranged his furniture. I was at the Phoenix Block site, negotiating with a stubborn foreman about structural supports when my phone started vibrating relentlessly, the sound cutting through the construction noise like a sudden, fatal drill through concrete. It was Priya, my sister and partner in the nonprofit venture, and her voice was a high-pitched shriek of panic that was instantly contagious. "Veda, the loan! It's gone!" "What are you talking about? Be specific, Priya." "The second tranche from Meridian Bank was due to finalize this week." "It was pulled. Completely, Veda. Legal just called. They used some obscure, newly invoked environmental liability clause connected to the brownfield site. They cited a specific, high-level corporate risk assessment that apparently deems our whole foundation unstable. They traced the assessment back to a private holding firm, They called it the Thorn Group. They said it was a corporate defense move to liquidate high-risk assets. The name hit me like a physical blow. Thorn. Elias's last name. The name I subconsciously recognized from the occasional finance magazine I skimmed. Now a monumental, destructive force. I stared blankly at the blueprints in my hand, suddenly seeing only the face of the man who struggled to hang a shelf. "The whole project is dead, Veda," Priya rushed on, sobbing. "We can't even pay the contractors we have. We're facing total structural collapse. The work we built our careers on is gone, and it was his family that killed it." I hung up, my hands trembling so violently I had to brace them against a stack of cinder blocks. Collapse. The word echoed Elias's own fears, but it was my life that was now the empty slab. My life's work, my foundation, buckled. Then, exactly 48 hours after the project was declared dead, a chilling miracle occurred. A cryptic email landed in the Phoenix Block Foundation account labeled simply Capital Strategy Review. It contained an attached document from a highly specialized, anonymous holding firm. The firm offered not just to cover the initial $4 million shortfall, but to establish a multi-million-dollar low-interest green development reserve that completely bypassed the need for the traditional hostile bank loans. The terms were aggressive, brilliant, and specifically tailored to negate every single one of the Thorn Group's corporate objections, while providing an immense tax shield. The note accompanying the contract was a single, simple, typed sentence. "Sometimes the best solution requires integrating the problem into the asset structure. I found you a better source of funding." I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. Integrating the problem into the asset structure. It was Elias's phrasing, the precise, detached, inhuman language of the corporate strategist I had interrogated in the coffee shop. He hadn't just slipped his real identity. He had used it in a grand, spectacular, and utterly terrifying manner to save me. He had allowed his family's mechanism of destruction to kill my project, only to resurrect it himself with a vastly greater power. The humble contractor I was playing along with was not just a rich man, he was a financial behemoth who could dismantle and reconstruct my entire professional world with an anonymous email. My aching pity for his loneliness vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp certainty. Elias Thorn knew his lie was crumbling, and he was compensating by leveraging his true, terrifying power to control the outcome. He hadn't stopped lying. He had simply changed the scale of the lie. I had to confront him. But first, I needed to know the true personal cost of this miracle. I didn't call. I didn't send an email demanding answers. I knew Elias Thorn would only respond to a physical siege. I went to his studio apartment, the very space I had softened with a tapestry and a rearranged lamp. I let myself in with the spare key he'd given me in a moment of deceptive trust. The studio was exactly as he'd left it, pathologically tidy, sterile and small. But now it no longer felt safe. It felt like a meticulously planned interrogation room.
I was wearing the thrifted wool dress from our first date, a calculated move to remind him of the person he thought he was pursuing. I walked straight to his small, functional desk and picked up a heavy object that was sitting next to his old laptop, a single, obscenely expensive cufflink, made of polished onyx and engraved with a precise, almost invisible T beneath an ornate family crest. I recognized the motif from an old Forbes article, the mark of the Thorn dynasty. I waited. He arrived 2 hours later, looking tired but energized, undoubtedly having just finished saving the world, or at least my nonprofit, with the same casual cruelty with which his family had tried to destroy it. He saw me instantly, standing rigidly in the center of his minimal living space. His face, usually so guarded, crumpled for a fraction of a second when he saw the cufflink resting in the palm of my hand. He knew the game was over. "Veda," he started, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I saw the news about the Phoenix block. I was going to call you." "Don't." I cut him off, my voice steady, dangerously quiet. I didn't raise it. I didn't need to. The silence in the small room carried more weight than any scream. I walked slowly toward him, forcing him to track my movement. "Don't insult my intelligence again. I am an architect, Elias. I design structures. I know the difference between a random collapse and a controlled demolition." I held up the cufflink. The Meridian bank loan was pulled because of a high-level corporate risk assessment. The source of that assessment, the financial assassin, was the Thorn Group. The only person who could preemptively know the precise language to circumvent that assessment, the only person who could set up a specialized green development reserve in 48 hours to replace millions of dollars of funding, is the man whose fingers are already on the financial levers of that group. I tossed the cufflink onto his leather sofa. It landed with a soft, final thud. The lie wasn't that you were a contractor. The lie was that your wealth was a problem. It was never a problem for you. It was a tool. You used your power to break my project, only to use your power to save it. You didn't give me a safe space. You gave me a cage with better structural integrity. Elias stood motionless, stripped bare of his costume and his defense mechanisms. "Veda, listen to me," he begged, taking a hesitant step forward. "The Meridian action, that was my father, his team. I didn't know the exact timing, but I knew the family had flagged the brownfield site. I panicked. I knew they were going to destroy your work. I used the only power I had to counter it. It was the only way to save the Phoenix block." "Save it?" I repeated. A short, bitter laugh escaped me. "You didn't save my project, Elias. You colonized it. You replaced my genuine struggle, my hard work fighting the system, with your own magnificent corporate rescue fantasy. My victory is no longer mine. It belongs to the anonymous investor who bailed out the poor architect, thereby proving that the system I fought against is the only way to
stung my
succeed."
eyes, not of sorrow, but of corrosive anger. You said you feared being loved for your money. But you know what's worse, Elias? Being used by a powerful man who is so afraid of genuine human connection that he has to buy the right to be vulnerable. You stole my story and made it about the brilliance of the hidden billionaire. He stood there, his jaw tense, his silence confirming everything. He was a master strategist, and he had been outmaneuvered not by logic, but by the exposed core of his own lonely heart. "You can't fix this with a contract or a loan," I whispered, the finality of the realization hitting me. "You can't fix a lie that has ruined my professional reputation, turning me from a serious architect into the CEO's pet project. I need to be structurally sound on my own, Elias, and right now, you are the instability I need to eliminate." I turned toward the door, every step a statement of profound and necessary separation. I walked out of Elias's small studio, leaving the cufflink, the symbol of his true, undeniable power, behind on his worn sofa. The door clicked shut, a quiet, definitive sound that sealed the end of our dangerous equilibrium. I wasn't just walking away from him, I was walking back into the real world, a world where the Phoenix block was still structurally dependent on an anonymous financial gesture from the man who had just emotionally annihilated me. I spent the next 48 hours in a fog of cold, righteous fury,
throwing myself into securing the necessary paperwork for the new anonymous funding. I was determined to use his tool to build my foundation, even if the thought of his help made the concrete taste like ash. But Elias's world, the inescapable world of high finance and media saturation, had already intervened. It started subtly. My phone, which had been silent for hours, began to buzz with calls and texts from old university contacts, people I hadn't spoken to in a decade. They weren't asking about the Phoenix Block's funding. They were asking about Elias Thorne's whereabouts. Then the rumors coalesced into a headline. A rival corporate executive, clearly alerted to Elias's slumming activities by someone who spotted him leaving the studio apartment, a targeted act of corporate sabotage, had leaked the story to a sensationalist finance blog. I was at my desk when Priya, pale and shaking, shoved her tablet in front of my face. The headline was plastered across the top of the page in mocking colossal font. Thorne Empire CEO caught in poverty tourism romance. Elias Thorne's $10 billion heartbreak experiment fools Brooklyn architect. The article was brutal. It didn't mention the Phoenix Block. It mentioned the Thorne Group's internal documents that flagged my brownfield site as a terminal risk. It featured grainy, invasive photos of Elias in his cheap hoodie and me in my wool coat standing outside my modest studio, making the encounter look like a staged charitable photo op. It painted Elias as a bored, manipulative strategist, and me, Veda Sharma, the architect who dedicated her life to sustainability, as his unwitting victim, or worse, a cunning social climber who leveraged his guilt. I was visible in a way that
damage was immediate and widespread. It didn't just assassinate my character. It structurally undermined my entire career narrative. All my hard-won credibility, the long hours, the tight margins, the integrity of my mission was erased and replaced by a simple transactional headline. I was no longer an architect. I was the CEO's pet project. My phone became a relentless weapon. Emails flooded in from neighborhood board members, clients, and potential future collaborators. They weren't congratulatory. They were cautious. They questioned the sudden anonymous grant that saved the Phoenix Block, suggesting I had finally sold out to the corporate machine I claimed to fight. "They're calling the anonymous grant hush money," Priya whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "They think you were blackmailing him after finding out who he was." The realization was a punch to the gut. Elias's lie, meant to find freedom, had instead built a towering, inescapable cage around us both. But I was the only one trapped inside it. He was suffering the consequences of a public relations nightmare. I was suffering the destruction of my life's purpose. He had feared being loved for his money, but in his desperate attempt to circumvent that fear, he had ensured that I would never be seen for my work again. My world, built on principles and ethics, had been contaminated by the sheer, overwhelming, media-fueled scale of his. Meanwhile, Elias, now fully exposed, couldn't retreat to his penthouse. He stayed in the ruined Brooklyn studio, surrounded by the debris of their abandoned life. He had nowhere to go, no honest persona left to assume. The full weight of his colossal power had just crashed down on the single, small sanctuary he had managed to create for himself. The initial wave of public scandal had passed, leaving behind a toxic residue of suspicion that clung to me like cheap plaster dust. The headlines had done their work. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was a wasteful emotion. What remained was a cold, hard clarity. The Phoenix Block project, my life's work, was now structurally sound thanks to Elias's anonymous millions, but it was ethically bankrupt.
every success would be viewed through the lens of a billionaire's penance. Elias tried to reach me. He called, he texted, he even left an expensive bottle of scotch, which I immediately gave to the foreman, at my studio door. I refused every attempt at contact. I knew any conversation would drag me back into the emotional quicksand of pity and warped intimacy. I couldn't afford a distraction. I had to rebuild my reputation from the ruins his corporate drama had created. I finally responded 2 days later, not to his phone, but to his corporate email, choosing a cold, official channel that stripped our interaction of any personal heat.
Elias, I have formally accepted the funding from the Anonymous Reserve, and the foundation is moving forward. I have spent the last 48 hours reviewing the documentation for your Green Development Reserve. It is, structurally, flawless. You leveraged your influence and your family's mechanisms of defense to create an asset that is unassailable. You saved the Phoenix Block. Now, I am terminating our relationship. Not because you lied, I was complicit in that lie, and I accept my share of the strategic deceit. I am terminating this because you leveraged your privilege to fix a problem that only existed because of your identity. The cost of your salvation is the legitimacy of my entire career. My personal struggle to succeed on principle has been replaced by your narrative of corporate rescue. You have successfully reduced me to a high-risk asset that required a specialized buyout. Your lie, intended to escape the corporate world, has only reinforced its ultimate destructive power over my world. I see your action now not as vulnerability, but as an unforgivable act of privilege. You found solace in playing the poor contractor. I find structural integrity in fighting the billionaire. You needed my small world to feel real. I need your massive world to disappear so I can feel real again. You can't fix this with more money. You can't fix this with an apology. You are an asset I have liquidated from my personal life. Do not contact me again. The Phoenix Block will be built, but it will be built without its architect bending to the will of its chief financier. Veda. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't save the email in my sent folder. I deleted the thread entirely. My heart felt like a massive, empty slab of concrete, but my mind was perfectly clear. I wasn't allowing rage to dictate my decision. I was allowing professional necessity. I had to survive, and survival meant cutting off the most dangerous, most powerful source of instability I had ever known. His lie was not a vulnerability, it was a contagion, and I had sacrificed him to save myself. Elias didn't need to read Veda's email twice. The subject line alone, final structural assessment, told him everything. Her words were not an emotional tirade, but a meticulously drafted legal and moral verdict. She had rejected the money, the safety, and the man, all in one cold stroke. She had declared him an instability that needed to be eliminated for the sake of her structure. He was sitting in the exact center of his small Brooklyn studio, the place that had been his only refuge, now utterly toxic. He hadn't left since the press broke the story. The walls, once a soothing beige, now felt like the closing confines of a coffin. He was surrounded by the relics of their shared lie. The crooked shelf in the closet, the tapestry she had used to cover the stain, and the empty space where the bottle of scotch
Veda had left behind. It felt impossibly heavy, cold, and obscene. He hadn't feared being loved for his money. He had feared that his money was the only thing that mattered. But Veda's calculated rejection was worse. She hadn't taken the money, yet she had still been ruined by its mere presence. He hadn't successfully escaped his identity. He had merely dragged the devastating scale of his power into her small, meaningful world and used it to crush her legitimacy. His internal monologue was a brutal, relentless loop of self-recrimination.
He had viewed his life as a series of risk assessments and contingencies, but he had failed to calculate the emotional volatility of a genuine connection. I didn't lie to her to test her. I lied to myself to feel safe. I stole her struggle. The silence in the apartment was deafening, not the controlled quiet of his penthouse, but the vast, aching emptiness of true isolation. He knew his PR team was trying to manage the public fallout, drafting statements, but the public didn't matter. The only audience was gone. He tried to call his family. He needed to hear his father's relentless demand for expansion, his mother's frigid concern for reputation, anything familiar to anchor himself. But his fingers hovered over the satellite phone. He realized he was afraid of them, not because they were cruel, but because they would confirm that he was indeed the Thorn Empire's CEO, the destroyer, the machine, and not the awkward, failing man Veda had momentarily seen. He couldn't go back to the world of glass towers, because he was now contaminated by the reality of the small, struggling world he had destroyed. He spent the rest of the night staring out the window at the anonymous millions of lights of the city. He owned vast tracts of that skyline, controlled the capital flow in those gleaming towers, yet he felt entirely detached. He had traded his vast, cold kingdom for a small, warm corner, and in his clumsy attempt to defend it, he had annihilated it. His greatest fear had been realized, but the truth was far more painful than he had anticipated. He wasn't bankrupt of money, he was bankrupt of purpose. The money remained, an ugly, immutable fact, and it was the very thing that ensured he would remain utterly alone. He finally understood Veda's cold rejection. The only way for her to survive the structural damage he had inflicted was to treat him as a corporate liability and liquidate the asset. He picked up the phone. He didn't call Veda. He called his executive assistant, Arthur, a man who saw him only as a schedule.
His
and a
voice was
network.
hoarse, raw from the silence. Cancel everything. The German acquisition, the Sterling Bank meeting. Every single thing. Clear the schedule. And get me an interview. Live. I want Sarah Jenkins. Sarah Jenkins, the toughest, most respected journalist on television. The decision was final, terrifying, and necessary. He was done hiding. If his power had destroyed her life, he would now use that power to publicly dismantle his own facade and rebuild her reputation with the only currency he had left, the truth. The world Elias operated in lived and died by its optics. He knew this interview wouldn't be a personal apology. It had to be a professional reckoning. If he spoke to a celebrity host, it would be framed as a scandal. He needed authority, intellectual gravity, and an audience that cared more about policy than passion. He secured Sarah Jenkins, the country's most respected architecture critic and urban planning expert, known for her relentless focus on the ethics of development. The setting was not the sterile set of a news studio, but a neutral, unadorned gallery space, placing the focus entirely on the words. Elias walked onto the set and sat down, wearing a simple, dark suit that was neither opulent nor casual, the uniform of a man who was there to work. He ignored the glare of the lights and focused only on the camera lens, directing his confession toward the empty silence where Veda existed. Sarah Jenkins didn't waste time on gossip. She started with the core issue. Mr. Thorne, the recent media frenzy paints a picture of a calculated deception, using the pretense of being a contractor to pursue an architect who is fighting your family's financial interests. Was the goal to undermine Ms. Veda Sharma's work and reputation? Elias didn't flinch. He leaned into the microphone, his jade eyes steady. The goal was the opposite, Miss Jenkins, but the effect was exactly that.
I came to Ms. Sharma under a false identity because I was terrified that my real identity, the name Thorne, had consumed me entirely. I wasn't looking for a woman. I was looking for a sanctuary from the weight of my own wallet. He paused, ensuring the full weight of the truth landed. My family's actions to flag the Phoenix block were predictable corporate defense. When I realized the damage, I used my knowledge to counter it immediately with the anonymous fund. This was not benevolence. This was panic. I tried to fix a structural problem with a financial band-aid. He looked directly into the camera, his voice rising with a rare, shattering intensity. But Ms. Sharma taught me that you cannot build a life or a career on a lie. My deception, no matter how emotionally motivated, has successfully reduced her life's work, her struggle for sustainable, ethical housing, into a media punchline, the CEO's pet project. That destruction of her legitimacy is the unforgivable sin here. This was the sacrifice. He was using the immense power of his name to validate her integrity. To rectify this, I am making 2 public commitments, Elias continued, his voice firm, entering the language of contract and certainty. First, I am liquidating my entire personal holdings in Thorne Financial Strategies, an immediate, irreversible step to separate my capital entirely from the family's operational decisions. Second, effective immediately, the newly established Elias Thorne Foundation for Urban Development will publicly commit to matching any future investment in Ms. Sharma's low-income housing initiatives for the next decade. This is not a bribe. It is a permanent, structural
intimate,
guarantee.
and strategically controlled. He deliberately framed it as a professional reckoning, sacrificing his professional anonymity and financial continuity to restore Veda's credibility. He was leveraging the only asset he had left, the irreversible power of his word, to dismantle the narrative that had ruined her. I am sacrificing my name and my privacy to correct my failure, he concluded. Ms. Sharma is the finest architect working in ethical urban development today. She stood for principle. I stood for panic. She deserves the success of her work, untainted by the shadow of my wealth. He sacrificed his professional identity and leveraged his name to publicly restore my reputation and fund my future, knowing this act might alienate her further, but it was the only ethical building block he had left to offer. I watched the recording of Elias's interview with Sarah Jenkins alone in my studio, the sound low, the image sharp and unforgiving. He was devastatingly effective. He hadn't just apologized, he had self-immolated. He used his name, the very thing I had rejected, to permanently validate my work and reputation. By liquidating his Thorne Financial Strategies holdings, he was physically removing the contamination of his legacy from any potential future dealings with me. It was the only genuine atonement he could offer. I felt a dizzying mixture of relief and immense, crushing sadness. The corporate structure was gone, but the man remained, isolated by the sacrifice. He had risked his power and his entire professional life to build a firewall around my ethics. I still had no intention of calling him. His structural solution was sound, but the emotional foundation between us was permanently fractured. He had used the language of finance to break my heart, and I would not allow him to use the language of apology to mend it. 2 days after the interview, a thick, expensive manila envelope arrived at the Phoenix Block Foundation office by a specialized courier. It wasn't money. It didn't contain another contract. It contained a single, legally executed deed for the property, the small, perpetually dim studio apartment in Brooklyn. The deed was signed over in its entirety to the Phoenix Block Foundation for Affordable Housing. It was a donation to be used as low-income residential space or office annex, a small but tangible asset for the nonprofit. It was the only piece of real estate Elias had ever considered safe, his physical refuge from the Thorne Empire. He had given away his only sanctuary. Tucked inside the deed was a short, simple, typed note. It wasn't signed Elias or Mr. Thorne or even E. It was entirely anonymous except for the content. A building requires the right function and scale to be deemed structurally sound. I understand now that that space only functioned when you were there. It belongs with you. Use it to build something true. The note contained the deepest psychological truth he had ever offered. He wasn't giving me a gift, he was giving me the physical embodiment of his loneliness. He was confirming that the lie, their shared sanctuary, had collapsed when I left. He recognized that the value of the apartment wasn't monetary, it was emotional and structural, and only I, the architect of his brief escape, could utilize it properly.
Devastating exchange. The silent, profound recognition that their shared space, built on a lie, was now dedicated to Veda's unyielding truth. He had removed himself entirely, leaving behind only the materials of construction. I held the deed, feeling the heavy, cold paper, the symbol of his true, complete sacrifice. I still couldn't forgive the deception, but I could no longer deny the depth of his regret. He hadn't just fixed the financial problem, he had fixed the moral architecture of the situation. The game was truly over. 2 weeks passed after the deed arrived. The studio apartment was now legally part of the Phoenix Block Foundation, a silent, powerful piece of irony. I had absorbed Elias's public sacrifice and his private offering. My reputation was stabilizing, the matching fund guarantee had terrified the local council into cooperation, and the media, satisfied with the blood sport, had moved on. The construction phase was finally ready to begin. I knew I couldn't move forward without one final communication. This wasn't about love or forgiveness. It was about structural integrity and professional necessity. I needed to understand the true cost of his transformation, and I needed to leverage his demonstrated genius responsibly. I called him, not on his personal line, but through the official communications channel of the Elias Thorne Foundation for Urban Development, the same cold conduit I had used to terminate him. He answered instantly, his voice guarded, formal. "Ms. Sharma." "Elias," I replied, matching his professional tone. "I received the deed. It was a substantial, ethical asset. Thank you." A pause stretched between us, thick with unspoken history. "It was the only structural piece I had left," he finally admitted, dropping the formality for a painful, truthful moment. "I know," I said. "And I saw the interview. You risked a great deal to protect my work. You sacrificed your anonymity, which was, ironically, the very thing you sought to protect when we met." I offered him a meeting, but not on neutral ground. "Meet me at the Phoenix Block site tomorrow at noon. Wear your overalls." He was there precisely at noon, standing outside the fence, looking hesitant and exposed. He wasn't wearing the pristine, stiff new overalls. He wore a worn, faded pair he must have salvaged. He looked less like a contractor and more like a man stripped down to his essentials. I didn't invite him inside the fence. I stood on the dusty perimeter holding 2 sets of architectural blueprints, one for the final Phoenix Block Tower, the other a massive master plan for an ambitious, citywide network of green, affordable housing I'd been secretly developing. "The lie is finished, Elias," I stated, my voice professional, detached, yet imbued with absolute control. "The corporate rescue is finished. The public melodrama is finished. We are back to the beginning, structure and purpose." I unrolled the small Phoenix Block plans. "This is what you saved. It will succeed. But this," I unrolled the large, aggressive master plan, spreading it across the chain-link fence, "is what I'm truly building. It requires capital, political pressure, and strategic manipulation on a scale far beyond a simple nonprofit board.
It requires fighting the system in its own language, with its own mechanisms. It requires a financial architect with the ruthlessness and genius you demonstrated in Module 2A.
Offering the final, profound invitation. I need an expert on long-term capital forecasting and preemptive injunctions. A financial weapon that is entirely predictable and entirely dedicated to the principles of ethical design. I need the strategist you were so desperate to hide. I am offering you a conditional partnership, Elias. I continued, making the terms explicit. You will serve as a specialized, non-voting financial consultant to the Phoenix Block Foundation. Your name is only used when the structural integrity of the mission requires the immense leverage of the Thorn brand. You will never, ever be my personal financier again. You will be my structural counterbalance against the very forces that created you. This wasn't a romantic reconciliation. It was a cold, necessary merger of equals, leveraging his power to serve my principle. Your purpose will be anchored in mine, I concluded, holding out the master plans. Can you accept that the only way back into my life is to use the very power you feared to build something you believe in without controlling the design? Elias stood motionless by the fence. The vast, intricate blueprints of my citywide housing network spread out between us, separated only by the chain link barrier. The sun glinted off the pages, illuminating the ambitious scope of the plan, the antithesis of the small, safe box he had tried to create for himself. He didn't reach for the plans, nor did he try to touch me. He simply absorbed the magnitude of the offer. His face, usually a study in corporate control, was a canvas of deep reflection. He was weighing the immense cost of this commitment against the immense vacuum of his own existence. Financial consultant, he finally repeated, the word slow, testing the foreign terminology. Non-voting, used only for leverage against the system I know best. He looked down at the documents, specifically at the projected budget sheet that showed a daunting $500 million requirement over 5 years. You are asking me to use the tools of the empire, without the pleasure of control, to build the structure that undermines the empire's philosophy. Yes, I confirmed, my voice unwavering. You asked me once what the point of it all was. I told you it was about repair. You are brilliant, Elias, devastatingly so, but without purpose, brilliance is destructive. I am offering you purpose, a foundation that won't buckle because it is anchored in the one thing you can't buy: principle. A slow, tentative smile finally touched his lips. Not the anxious smile of the liar, nor the cold smirk of the strategist, but something genuinely relieved. You are correct, he conceded. I can't design the building, but I know exactly how the financial pipes need to run to ensure the structure never fails due to political pressure. I am better at anticipating catastrophe than creating comfort. He pushed his worn hands, the hands of the fake contractor, through the chain link, his fingers brushing the edge of the master plan. I accept the condition, Miss Sharma. I accept the non-voting status. I will use the power I feared to protect the work I respect. This was the true final sacrifice, accepting a position of power stripped of any reward save the satisfaction of the ethical outcome. I finally stepped forward, pushing open the temporary gate into the construction site. The air was loud with the honest clamor of dozers and excavators, the sound of true labor. I didn't offer my hand for a formal shake. Instead, I picked up one corner of the massive blueprint and motioned for him to take the other. The work starts now, Elias. We have permits to finalize, and I need a long-term capital strategy for this whole metropolitan section that guarantees sustainability against inevitable corporate pushback. He walked onto the dusty ground of the Phoenix block, and together we spread the massive blueprint across the hood of my dirt-caked truck.
We stood shoulder to shoulder, no longer facing each other in accusation, but facing the document, a unified front against the world. He pointed to a highly contested plot on the master plan, his mind already shifting into high gear. If we approach the city with a municipality-backed green bond rather than private equity, we can circumvent the existing development firm's lien, but we need political cover from the mayor's office first. I watched him as he spoke, his voice crisp, professional, his fear of failure channeled entirely into protecting my vision. He was still Elias Thorne, the financial weapon, but his aim was true. I realized then that the chaos of the lie had been necessary. We hadn't fallen in love in the conventional sense. We had recognized each other's deepest structural needs. He needed purpose to manage his power. I needed power to defend my purpose. I offered a genuine smile, the dust and the chaos of the construction site feeling like a real, solid home. Then let's design the financing, Architect Thorne. The game of deception was over. The work of reconstruction had truly begun.